Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology Podcast, featuring tech legend Jay Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. The NeuroNoodle Podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
Dear,
This is what we've come to, Jay. Anterior cingulate. That's what I tell my wife.
Well, it's an entire reward deficiency syndrome.
Yeah.
And you can see it as a thalamocortical dysrhythmia as well. And it cuts across the DSM. The same pattern is seen in obsessive compulsive, but also in a high percentage of those that complain of depression. If they have an anhedonia and anxiety, anterior cingulate, very commonly. So it cuts across the DSM, but then the DSM, is worthless.
What do you take for it? They give you a magazine subscription?
Well, there's plenty of people that have digital copies of it, but it's not worth, unless you're doing billing and admin, it's not worth anything. No predictive validity, high replicability, but no predictive validity.
So this is a pre-show. The subject came up, a listener, viewer, anonymously suggested that we talk about porn addiction. And Dr. Marie Swingle, who's about to come in the room, she happens to know a little bit about addiction out there.
Oh, yeah.
And
internet.
And internet, yes, with her book, iMinds.
And here she is.
Hello.
Right on time.
We're talking about porn.
Let's do this, gentlemen. I am not shy on this topic. I think it's a critical topic affecting the development of young males, destroying marriages, intimacy. And it's not just about the boys, it's crossing over to the females as well. And I have some heavy research on this in terms of how it's affecting us all. So lead me in.
That's what she said, literally. We had a request regarding pornography and addiction, and it's like, okay, that could get us some views. That could get us some listens, and maybe they'll trip over and see some of our other content, but it's a real thing. Jay, you're telling me that there's a DSM-5 category for this?
There's actually a neurological pattern called thalamocortical dysrhythmia that is seen in reward deficiency syndrome. Which is at the frontal midline. It's dopamine driven, and this reward deficiency syndrome has been described by Kenneth Blum really quite well. You'll see him quoted quite currently. But the thalamocortical dysrhythmia aspect of it is basically most well developed by Dirk Deridder, who's identified that the same pattern of brain network failure is seen in tinnitus and pain and movement disorders like Parkinsonism, and also reward deficiency, which about 80% of the depressed individuals fell into that category as well. So and the pattern cuts across the DSM, because the DSM is, well, don't even get me started on DSM. But the pattern at the anterior midline is predictive of obsessive compulsive behaviors, and it's obviously associated with slow content in the EEG when dopamine is deficient. So the there's all this wonderful EEG material that goes along with this, but I think the therapist discussion, not just the discussion of what the EEG wigglies are doing, end up being the richness that we really can provide here. And Mari is more of that therapeutic end. I'm the geek who looks at the wiggly lines end of it. So I welcome her input and experience in this area, published and polished in this area.
Well, thank you, Jay. I hope we can talk with a lot of humor today, because it's a very serious topic. But just holding up my book here, I kind of went through. I think I have over 80 pages on this. I mean, in terms of how our interactive technologies have completely invaded. And I think the two areas, well, back when I first started my research, when we were calling this internet addiction, we were only talking about two classifications. It was essentially gaming addiction and pornography addiction. And I think in some of my earlier research, again, we have to put this in context. We're talking about 2012, 2013 is when I collected all of this data. Actually, probably 2011, 2012. I wrote it up in 2013. But I was looking at males and females in what we call classic binary. But I was also looking at transgender individuals, and this is way before I would say that this was on the radar the way it is today, as well as gay and lesbian individuals. And the only reason why I'd say there were more gay individuals and trans individuals in my study was these were disenfranchised populations. Okay, especially if individuals were in smaller communities. Big cities, individuals can find partners and friends and communities, but in smaller communities, that was an issue. So I find that I'm absolutely blessed in terms of the type of data that I have. But in terms of why individuals are attracted to pornography, what it's doing to the brain, no apologies. I'm going to be talking about binary concepts and gender in traditional as well as non-traditional ways. But, females, the first myth is that this is a male problem. It's different. So females engage with pornography for romance, fantasy, exhibitionism, and cybersex. So a lot of the early gaming of females, there was a lot of sexual play, for example, in Second Life. Males, it tends to be pornography, anonymity, voyeurism, porn, and the huge one, objectification. So for a lot of females, trans individuals, gay males, and gay females, there's a relationship aspect. So essentially the medium is permitting, it's not a full substitution, I guess is what I'm saying. With males, what we're finding is an absolute, complete, and total override. I'm going to reference the early work of Naomi Wolf. She was one of the first people who kind of said, don't worry about all these sex maniacs, because of all the pornography, you're actually creating functional eunuchs. They're just essentially staying home and masturbating. So with the young males, it's gaming and masturbation. We have many, many more young virgins. And then for older males, essentially what we're dealing with is a lot of erectile dysfunction that has nothing to do with the naturally aging male. It's not a blood flow issue. It can't be cured with Cialis and Viagra. It has nothing to do with andropause or dropping testosterone. It's a template. It's an arousal template issue. And the one that really, really scares me is young developing males. So there's a term that I've coined now, which is juvenile erectile dysfunction. Okay, so these are young males who has essentially learned about sexuality or their sexuality, their desire template has developed from porn, and they are absolutely 100% dysfunctional with real embodied sexual interaction. They can't get it up, they can't keep it up, and they can't orgasm. So that's my general overview. I also have pictures of the brain in terms of what this can look like. Good news, bad news. The porn addicted brain looks exactly like the gaming addicted brain. Okay. And again, it's reward templates, it's arousal templates. Oh gosh, gentlemen, I can go on and on and on, whether we want to talk about the relationship factors, like where do you want to take me?
How much is too much?
I'm perfectly fine. I don't, I don't want to be rude and lewd and crude, but I don't think this is a show to censor because people need the real information.
I'm not censoring. I want to know how much porn is too much. That's a legit question.
Oh, okay. How much is too much?
I gotta check my notes.
About where we're going to go. I think it depends, right? And I think it's also like alcohol. For some individuals, you tip with a very, very small amount. Other individuals can consume a little bit more. And I think one of the things we get caught up in is, being a prude or these type of things. I say it's too much if you prefer porn to a current partner, if you prefer porn to pursuit. Okay. And I know we have to be a little bit delicate here. And this is where I really want to talk about how pursuit is natural for the male. Okay. But I'm not talking about toxic masculinity. We're talking about natural pursuit. If we don't have pursuit, we don't have, continuation of the species. Yeah. But that's another one where we can spin around, as females tend to be more the pursuers now, not because they've been enabled to do so, but because the men are not pursuing. So bottom line is, if you're not as interested in your partner, okay, if you have trouble getting an erection, sustaining an erection, and reaching orgasm, that's too much.
The kids today, they don't, a couple things that I hear is going on. I don't want to get too much into politics, but I've heard that politics comes into play where the females lean a certain way and it may turn off the men. And then the men, they're too involved in this non-human contact stuff, so they don't go the female.
Yeah, hunt is, we want to avoid the predatory language, but
predatory, yeah. That's why you got to censor me, Dr. Marie. But
cross-generational,
is that what's going on though?
Language. I'm not going to get offended by it. We're all relearning. But what do you mean by females lean a certain way? I think we need to be very clear here.
Virtue signaling. I don't want to say woke. They have a certain way that they're very defensive on the men that pursue them, and then the men get turned off, and then they
okay. I think I know exactly what you're trying to say, and I think
please help.
The fact that you are having so much trouble finding words, there is probably a fear of expression, etc. This is the problem we have. I think it's the classic pendulum. Okay, we needed Me Too. Okay. In my therapist chair as a female now, for better or for worse, in her late 50s, boy, oh boy, have I heard it all. Okay. We have way too much predatory behavior. The frequency of sexual assault, etc., is horrendous. Okay. But there should be, and so we needed that. So we were way over here. And now what we've done is we've gone absolutely the opposite way. And that's not healthy either. One of the things I really, really want people, I'm not saying it should be or shouldn't be. I want people thinking about this, okay? But is it predatory to ask somebody out on a date? Okay. My attitude, professional as well as personal, is no. My little rule that I think is sensible from a professional perspective is you get to ask 3 times. After that, it can turn a little bit creepy. So first time, maybe the female isn't even aware of your existence, is no, thank you. Second time, she's like, well, okay, I'm aware, but not really interested. Third time, she could say yes, or she'd go, sorry, buddy, really not interested. Okay, I think that, to me, that kind of works. And I think some of the sensitivity levels should come down. The other one is in terms of all these permissions. And are we destroying romance, the potential for intimacy? So if you're in a certain environment, and gentlemen and ladies, and maybe those are bad terms, but we have to use our heads and our hearts. Sometimes you can sense things, sometimes we get it wrong. Okay. But if you're very close to somebody and leaning in for a kiss, okay, you should be able to read an expression and know to back off. But if you sit there and go, may I kiss you? Is the moment lost? Okay. Or can there be a beauty to that? And here I'm going to bring out the actress in me, which is, may I kiss you? Okay. So there's certain ways that things are done. And I think we just really need that pendulum to stop. But I think the guys running to porn, because the gals are too woke and they're all frightened, I think that's a cop-out. Okay. I think we need to have all of these conversations, talk about reality. Porn is a huge, huge business, destroying intimacy, killing relationships, and I'd say massively harming the development of the male population, and really confusing youth.
Fear of missing out. I don't know if they're asking people out versus they're swiping on apps. So there's he knows what I'm talking about. You have so many more opportunities now than back when, in our day, Mari. It's like, who do you pick? And you're not asking, do you want to, Netflix and chill? And there's, the romance is kind of taken out of it, and the birth rate is going down, right? So,
well, no kidding. The only generation that's highly sexually active now is actually geriatrics, believe it or not.
Jay.
I think elders have very healthy sex lives now compared to the young. I mean, it actually is kind of funny. The highest rate of STDs is in elders. I mean, part of that is just kind of cute, because that's the generation. The only thing they were fearful of was pregnancy. It's like, wake up. There are other things to be fearful of.
Well, fear of missing out. You have technology now where you get more opportunities, and if you're overwhelmed with choices, you make no choice. You just go out and play Fortnite.
Yeah, it's if we go into gambling, generalized addiction, you have the varied reinforcement schedule. Okay, don't know who's going to show up when. You have potential, increased content, increased stimulation, and unlimited access. Why would you ever pick anybody or anything? Right. And here we're into the dating apps. The person now that says hi in the coffee shop is the weirdo. I don't know, maybe I'm old, but I think the weirdo is the guy who sends you his dick pic,
Wasn't me.
I mean, let's really talk true and straightforward here. We have an issue. And I also think it starts earlier. Adolescence is an age that is extremely awkward. Most of us remember it as extremely awkward pre-tech, where we're transferring from children to young adults. We're developing into sexual beings. We pseudo stutter when we talk to the opposite gender, or to be more inclusive to somebody who may interest us on a physical level. And now all of that is done through a device. Okay, so I would say that many individuals have never learned how to talk. They've never learned how to flirt with a wink instead of in a predatory way. Okay, who's teaching them? Where are our uncles and our dads and our moms, right? The school is teaching this, okay? So I think we go back a little bit to basics. Your kids are learning from porn, they're learning from school, and they're learning from technology. right? It's a bit of an issue.
Birds and the bees. Does anybody do that anymore?
They know it all. They
Or
know
they're
it all.
teaching us.
Yeah. Well, again, that's the other one. When you have a young male who's essentially learned everything from pornography, the first encounter, and again, I'm going to talk in binary terms. The first experience for female it can be violent. I mean, majority of porn now is triple X. If we get into specific sex acts like fellatio, it's full throat gagging. It's the complete blocking of the air passage. Do you want that to be a young female's first sexual experience? Right? Also, in terms of the repertoire, what's expected. And many young females are going like, whoa, I want nothing to do with this. Others are learning to mimic and studying and act what they need to do. But generally speaking, it's very, very unhealthy. Call me old-fashioned, but I think you should have two bumbling people being very, very awkward, discovering each other's hearts and bodies, being, deviant in a positive way. And the influence where they're learning from should not be porn.
Jay, I see my tech doing
there's also if you can get somebody peeled away from the internet porn, if their anterior cingulate drive isn't fixed, they're going to do symptom substitution.
Yes.
They may never look at porn again. Well, there's a good possibility they may, but they'll find something else. There's drugs, and if it's not drugs, goodness, there's gambling. I mean, there's huge numbers of different things that the cingulate can lock onto. The reward deficiency syndrome can cut across multiple DSM categories, and if you fix the drive, the behaviors that are associated with it are no longer a problem. So ultimately, there's a brain fix, not just a behavioral management. That you could, let's say it's your kid that you discover wildly into porn, and you put some parental control of some sort on it. Well, if you haven't fixed the drive, goodness knows, there's five alternative pathways for them to find something to tickle their fancy. So
thanks for looping us back, Jay, in terms of the treatment. But when we opened the show, I think I stated that the profile that I've seen is not unique to pornography addiction. And Pete, I think I sent you a couple of templates on that. There are two things that we see. One is across the board in terms of addictions, and the other is in terms of this outrageous amplitude in alpha. But going to what Jay said, it has to be treated in tandem. The other thing is, this isn't like alcohol where you can choose abstinence. Okay, it's like an eating disorder. Okay, you have to eat. You want to eat. They're really, really yummy things to eat, and you should eat the yummy things. Okay, but not all of the things that are horrendously bad for you. So in terms of neurotherapy and how I work with this, first of all, open, transparent. You have to be really, really comfortable about talking about sex and sex acts and patterns, and just make a really, really open, non-judgmental environment for your client, because this is awkward. I think I might have an advantage being a slightly mature female, but I'd say anybody, you need to create that environment. I wouldn't say be ultra hip and cool, because you want to help people break something that could be harmful. But as Jay was saying, the two locations you really want to hone into are the cingulate. Okay, so if you have a hot cingulate, as Jay said, you're going nowhere if you can't quiet that down. The other tends to be also excessive beta in the occipital region. So again, what we tend to see in these states of hyperarousal, And sometimes there's also insufficient theta in the back, so individuals can't quiet, which loops us into why do people become addicted to pornography? Okay, all I would say interactive technologies addiction. People start as either boredom or as an emotional mitigator. They feel stressed. Okay, you game. Not going to be apologetic, but one of the best stress reliefs is orgasm. People discover that pretty quickly. The best pill for insomnia is orgasm. People discover that pretty quickly. The feel-good hormones, okay? We are naturally wired, again, because the species wouldn't continue if we weren't wired this way. But when I'd say pornography or technology hijacks our biology, pun intended, we're screwed. And that's what's happening here. And, you know, Jay, you might be able to talk more about dopamine. I have a lot of, I would say, theory here. Lord knows all the studies I want to do, but I haven't been able to track this yet. But I'd love to track the dopaminergic cycles and development in the young. So here, what I'm talking about are like a 9-year-old male who discovers porn. So essentially becomes a very heavy porn consumer, 9 to 13. I always say very generally, there's a part of the brain that becomes hijacked, and it's different than a sexually mature male that finds it. But if anybody wants to do that study, contact me. I am beyond on board. But where do you get young males or parents that are saying, yeah, come study my young son's porn and masturbatory behavior? It's going to be a hard study. Yeah.
If I'm just imagining my tech having an intake of somebody coming in to get this corrected, they don't have to say what they're addicted to, that you just have an addiction. Is that right? Dealing with the anterior, you have to say, okay.
I very respectfully disagree. And what I found is that I have worked with individuals and with couples, and everything looks really great. And they're back within 6 months and everything is collapses. And the one thing that has not been dealt with was the pornography addiction. And again, people will come in, they'll report the stress, they'll report mood issues, they'll report that they're online too much, but they don't, if they don't report the porn, they might even, report lower libido. And, there's this big absolute falsehood that, females are refusing sex, and that's the reason why males go on porn. That's not true at all. That's an absolute myth. You have many, many females who are just, essentially empty in their relationships because they're being refused. And I repeat, refused intimacy with their partners. Yeah. I'm beyond direct. Sometimes I ask people when they come in as a couple in front of them. Sometimes I more often tend to isolate and ask questions when individuals are apart. But very, very rarely is the female not aware. Right? She might not be aware to the depth of the degree, but she knows. The other thing, even in young females, most individuals also in new relationships can tell when somebody that they've started to date and somebody they start to become sexually intimate with is a heavy consumer of porn. It's about the sensing of the objectification. It's also about the repertoire or the type of sex acts, frequency of change within a, shall we say, an intimacy session. There are all kinds of things that indicate that a male is an over consumer of porn.
Is there a difference on the QEEG if it's a porn addiction or alcohol addiction, or no?
No, I haven't found it. No.
Okay.
The anterior cingulate has, when it's working properly, you have flexibility, emotional and cognitive flexibility. But when it's not working, you end up with an obsessive compulsive lock on something, or an amotivation, lack of initiation, anhedonia, you're locked on or off. You don't have the flexibility. And it can be disturbed with alpha or theta or beta. All of them disturb the function of the anterior cingulate. So you can tell by the behavior that the anterior cingulate is not working right, but you have to go there and look to see which kind of failure mode it's in, and that's going to change kind of how you treat things as well. But the dopaminergic system with respect to pleasure in the basal forebrain is largely the nucleus accumbens, which is your pleasure unpleasure center. And you notice I said unpleasure, not pain. There are some people that pain is pleasure.
Yeah.
So pleasure and unpleasure is more like the anhedonia. It's not pain. It's just blah blah. It's a nothingness. So your lock on is an obsessive drive, and the lock off is an anhedonia, and both of those end up looking for something to stimulate that dopaminergic pathway. And upwelling from the brainstem through the nucleus accumbens are all your sensory relays. The direct sensory stuff up to the sensory cortex, but there's a collateral into the brainstem reticular activating system, which goes to the thalamic diffuse projection system, which goes through the nucleus accumbens and the basal forebrain, where all the dopamine is. And if you have a reward deficiency, there's a problem with the dopamine system usually. So that's usually seen as a slow, but it can also be seen as a disturbance of that system with fast. And that the frontal lobe is not doing affective regulation at all with alpha, which is essentially an off or an idling. So if you've got a dynamic, active anterior cingulate, you're not stuck on something. But if you have a reward deficiency problem, you may end up getting stuck on something. And if you're pulled off of that, you may stick to something else until you get the anterior cingulate working properly. And there's a lot of ways to actually treat that. You can treat the anterior cingulate with TMS. You can treat it. There are people that are effective at working with it with, direct face-to-face therapy. But I have to say, that's a longer route than a direct feedback of the anterior cingulate. You can get the pathophysiology straightened out, and then the counseling stuff goes quick. I mean, if the anterior cingulate is working, after that, discussing the fact that it's working and how to keep it working works, as opposed to trying to work with somebody whose cingulate is not working. And it's difficult to talk them through getting that working. There was a deal about OCD, and O'Neill wrote about the kind of a talk therapy, cognitive behavioral way to kind of trick the brain into not having an OCD. Basically, if you have an OCD, that's an obsession. Ride the obsession to stop it. So anyway, I think training
really well for hand washing. I've noticed. I'm being
but TMS, they've shown efficacy with TMS. Martijn Arn showed that if you have a sleep disorder, the TMS for OCD doesn't work until you treat the sleep disorder. So there's something even about the TMS that says a learning process, because sleep deprivation ends up disturbing the ability to transfer from short-term to long-term memory. So something about the session has to have a learning curve, even with the TMS, which is kind of viewed as a treatment, not a training. But
Well, let me jump in there.
there's
Also,
some learning.
kind of piggyback something that you said. So this is where everything is compounding, because for individuals who are professionally employed, yes, they sneak off into washrooms, but most of this behavior is happening at night in front of a very bright screen. Okay, so we're talking about overstimulation, the blue light affecting circadian rhythm, melatonin production, sleep, just an hour less of sleep. So this, I mean, it's a complete compounding. And before you continue, I think it's absolutely imperative that you get a qualified neurotherapist and a qualified therapist. You need this is one of those cases where if you only do the neuro, it's not going to work. If you only do the talk therapy, it's not going to work. You need to get change in the brain. And a lot of the therapy is actually educational. It's not looking deep in your navel in terms of why you develop this behavior. It's understanding the biology, okay? Where, how, why this started, okay? Why your brain has been hijacked, how it's been hijacked, how the biology has been hijacked, and then, of course, the awareness of what this is doing to your intimate life. Whether you're in a stable monogamous relationship, or whether you're out and about playing, or whether you're out and about trying to find a stable monogamous relationship, all of these things, they need to be discussed in tandem.
Mari, you brought up Second Life and the female side of things. I remember Second Life from about 10, 15 years ago. I don't know, still around. But why do the females tend to go, if that's their porn, like what's going on in the head there that they gravitate towards that versus the guys?
It's an intimacy factor. It's a fantasy romance. There's an interpersonal component.
The Hallmark factor?
Pardon me?
The Hallmark movie factor?
Oh, no, that's too cheesy. I mean, the women really get into it. There's no Hallmark here. This is deep and dirt. Think, Penthouse, whatever stories way back in the day. No, this is raunchy stuff. They're having a lot of sexual fun, but there's an interpersonal component.
Can neurofeedback do something about that with my wife, fixing that component?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like,
jokes aside, what you need to do is look at one is the hijacking of biology. Okay. But the other is, on the softer side, why is an individual going outside of a supposedly stable relationship for their mental, physical, or heart fulfillment? Okay. Now, nothing wrong with a little. It's kind of like, once you're married, you don't stop noticing attractive people, right? We're all kind of a bit of human. The other thing, we're talking about pornography. Absolutely nothing wrong with masturbation to your own fantasy. I mean, go for it. That's all healthy. It's the component of the pornography and the arousal template that is the problem.
Hormones come into play?
Absolutely.
I'm not trying to be pituitary, so there's no hormones going on unless I take them.
If we're going to look at this as well, I mean, there's certain phases in all relationships where there's sexual instability, perhaps. Okay, so one of the things is after the birth of a child. Okay, sex lives change. Okay, sometimes everybody again blames the female, but very frequently the male starts to see the female as this mother figure as opposed to his passionate sex partner. So I mean, we have to look at both sides. The other is, as couples wait longer and longer to have families, a lot of individuals are in fertility treatment. So for years, sex isn't fun. There's no joy. They're on a procreation schedule. Okay, so that's one point of fragility. The other is, andropause and menopause. Okay, so a lot of females, as they're creeping up to menopause, everybody talks about how the young male sex drive through the roof. The female, right before menopause, her sex drive goes way up. It's kind of like the last hurrah. So very frequently, again, you have a mismatch in libido. And then, of course, around menopause or right after, many females' libido goes down, but it does readjust. Okay, same thing with males. We have andropause, we have potential for the beginnings of erectile dysfunction. And again, there's so much that can be done. We used to call these midlife crises, but this is, midlife crisis with the hormones and natural aging. But talk to a decent doctor. There's lots of things that can be done on that, or talk to a therapist who knows about these things. There's no reason to, quote unquote, suffer and have your sex life or your intimacy suffer. But the only thing I say is please do not go to porn in these mismatch phases, or I would say stages where intimacy is affected in long-term relationships, because that will potentially unravel intimacy and also the hijacking of biology. It'll make things not work.
Yeah.
And Pete, you're asking me before, what's the sign of, excuse me, what's too much? Obviously, if things don't work. But the other thing for men of all ages, I would say, if you want to be a better lover, don't consume porn. Period. It's as simple as that.
There's different types of varieties of porn. I just want to throw one out there that when you include pain, like how does that come into play?
There's kink culture. Okay. Yeah. And I mean, I hate the terms. Everybody talks about vanilla sex as if it's boring. Okay. I mean, who is anybody to judge how somebody wants to make love or hell have wild, passionate sex? Okay. Whatever floats your boat in an adult, consensual relationship, period. And within all that, I'd say there's such a wide range of healthy behaviors. And I think we have to be really, really careful of judging. Okay. Now, a certain kink culture does involve that pleasure-pain dynamic. Okay. And then there's a tipping point where it can turn into pathology. Okay. So if individuals cannot be sexually satisfied without a higher level of pain, that might be tipping into self-harm. But again, a good therapist schooled in this will really be able to help you figure it out.
So the storefront EEG people, that they shouldn't be.
I would say don't go out of scope. As with anything, be careful of scope.
Yeah.
Be careful of scope. Yeah. But there are a lot of individuals. I'd say that this is I think everybody's on pornography addiction as the newest thing, and everybody says they're an expert. I'd be a little bit cautious about that. But I would say that schooled individuals in the very, very wide range of healthy sexual behavior, they're few and far between. I would say you have many individuals that are far too narrow, and I would say also individuals that are trying to be way too hip and they're far too broad. There are the edges of pathology. Yeah.
The social dilemma shows the downside of social media, because you have people behind the scenes trying to figure out what you're clicking on. These porn guys, these were the original social dilemmas. These are the dopamine fiends, the masters, to figure out what people are looking for. So if there's anybody hooked out there, there's a reason, for it. And to get unhooked, number one, you read Dr. Marie's book, iMinds. It's right behind your left shoulder there.
Yeah, I keep it strategic.
And it's also right here.
There it is. There.
And we have it on the site here.
But also, I don't know, I don't do a lot of video counseling because I find interpersonal is so much better. But if you're in a region where you don't have access, reach out and contact me. We can do some basic what I call educational counseling for individuals to understand their own behavior, and then perhaps be able to seek out a local neurotherapist in your area.
And to be clear, Dr. Marie's not accepting pictures.
Only of your brain.
Jay, we've been doing this a long time. This is a unique show, huh?
Well, the breadth and depth of the show,
Well, we'll see what YouTube allows.
The various treatments we've talked about on TMS and the various EEG patterns, but there's been some interesting work, Dr. Deridder, looking at essentially the slow cortical potentials. Now, the infraslow and infralow people kind of argue about who's got what part of the spectrum as theirs or whatever, but you can literally turn on and off or activate and inactivate brain areas with the slow cortical potentials. And being able to turn on or off the anterior cingulate, whether it's excessively activated or inactivated, ends up being something that can be done therapeutically using that kind of an approach. The spectral approach, S. Loretta, can actually focus on that anterior cingulate structure, and then you can train cross-frequency coupling or a specific frequency that needs to be changed. I mean, you need to look at what's wrong in order to know how to fix it. So there's no standard protocol. If a place has a standard protocol for OCD, it'll probably take care of one of the large subgroups, but it won't help everybody. There's multiple presentations again, so you need to customize or personalize your approach. The evidence-based outcomes are based on personalized approaches.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to pause and repeat what Jay said. You need to customize. There are a couple of regions of the brain that we know are implicated, but this is highly individualistic. Apologies for the interruption, Jay, but I really wanted to hammer that home. Floor back to you.
I don't mind playing badminton. That's fine.
Pardon the pun, pickleball.
I wondered what the hell that was. I keep seeing pickleball go by on the TV screen. I finally stopped and watched what the hell they were doing. So
they got their own issues. Jay, Dr. Marie, do we beat this? Well, I should have said that. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.